Hello and welcome to my review of The Dark Crystal Age of Resistance. I'm going to be reviewing episode 1 to 10, and then I'll also be reviewing the behind the scenes documentary called The Crystal Calls. I'm going to put timestamps in the video description so that you can watch an episode, come back to this video, watch another episode, come back to this video. It'll be like we're watching it together. I consider myself a Dark Crystal super fan, so you'll know that this is an expert fan opinion. I hope that you will enjoy my thoughts. So we're going to start with episode 1. So the first thing that happened in the episode was this intro, which was explaining the whole world, but it was really quick and fast, and the whole intro was just way too fast and unnecessary, because the film, if you saw the film, you would know that the beginning of the film is really slow and ominous. The series kind of lacks the slow, ominous feel. This is just a personal opinion, but I thought the narrator for the first episode was not as good as the original voice actor for the film. Her voice lacked power. I was really happy that they included the original score during the title sequence. A lot of effort went into episode 1. Okay, episode 1, we meet Rian. And he has a girlfriend who I thought was one of the worst puppets. Her mouth didn't move quite right. It was, she was a bad puppet. I also thought that the titles of the locations, like the location titles, were a little too obvious. I thought the location titles were a little too hand-holdy, because there were different locations and we kind of knew which location we were in because the locations were so different. You know, you had the snowy village, you had the wooded village, and then you had the underground village. I don't think that they really needed location titles to explain where we were. There were some really beautiful set design. Looks like they built really big environments for the puppets to inhabit. So it was nice to see that the puppets were actually in a physical world. So I thought that the first episode in general was kind of boring, up until Rian's girlfriend gets her essence sucked out of her, and then she dies. That's when my interest was piqued, because it was sickeningly evil. When Rian's girlfriend died, it was like a really good hook to get me interested in watching the rest of the episodes. And that's it for episode 1. So with episode 2, it was really nice to see Agra's set. It looked like they had remade Agra's big planetarium or whatever that's called. It looked like they had remade that. Deet is one of the better puppets. One of the best puppets, I think. Just because her eyes are so, she can portray so much emotion through her eyes, and I think they did a little CGI to add to her mouth. I was surprised to see how useful dream fasting could be to know the truth. It kind of adds to the whole theme of being one with each other. You know, the Gelflings are connected while also being connected to Agra, the planet, the crystal. This episode, I really noticed how much money and time went into this series. finally, we got this series. I waited 3 to 4 years for this fucking series to come out. It took a long time for them to actually create the whole world, the puppet. So this episode, I noticed the CGI and how good it looked. Like there were some scenes where the Gelfling would be in the background, but it would be a CGI animation of the Gelfling like running or whatever. And it looked so good. The CGI looked so good. So then I was thinking, why not make this whole series in CGI? We actually find out why they didn't do CGI in the behind the scenes, the Crystal Calls. And we will be talking about that. We will be talking about that at the end of the video. Again, so much money and time on puppets and sets when it could have been animated. The Queen had one of the worst puppeteers. I'm not sure if the puppet was difficult to handle, but there wasn't a whole lot of acting from that puppet. It was a shame. They animated the Skeksis' tongues. So why didn't they animate the Gelfling tongues? They could have animated the Gelfling tongues and it would have looked like a million times better instead of, it would have, adding a CGI tongue would have really benefited the puppets. By the end of the episode, I felt like there was a lack of wonder and mysticism so far. I feel like episode 2 is one of the worst episodes of the entire series. If you can make it past this episode, then continue watching the series because it picks up. Okay, episode 3. This is the episode where things really pick up. We get to see a podling butt, nudity. This is like the nudity episode. There's puppet nudity everywhere. Why is a sentient species washing another species that is sentient? So why are the Gelflings washing podlings? And I'm going to be talking about that at the end of the video when I talk about the behind the scenes portion. This is an episode where I ask myself, where are the racial minorities of Gelflings? So far the Gelflings have been a paler color, including the Groton Gelflings. They're green colored, but they're still kind of like really pale. Where are the black Gelflings? Where are they? I want to know. Rian goes to Stone in the Wood, and he goes into the throne room, and this was an amazing scene, I thought, because it was an action scene, and it finally progressed the story. Okay, so then we see nude Skeksis taking like a bath in a community bathroom, which was like, what? So now you can see why I say that this episode was the episode of nudity. It's crazy. Okay, so then two main characters, Deet and Rian, meet finally, but then they separate immediately, which was really annoying. We see Bria take a moth chrysalis, and we see what kind of magic the Gelflings actually use. It's totally one with nature, which again adds to the theme of everybody being part of the planet, which was really cool. Yeah, episode 3, definitely into it now. If you get past episode 3 and you still hate the series, then don't watch anymore. But if you still want to watch after episode 3, I really recommend that you watch the entire series because it really picks up. Episode 4. I was really excited to see the intro title had some flames on it. It was cool to change it up a bit. There was a beautifully nostalgic eating scene with the Skeksis. It was really, really quite disgusting. Then we get introduced to a artificial intelligence. it's like a rock robot. His name is Lore. I love that he had like audio technology. Who would have thought that? But it totally makes sense. Then there's a nostalgic podling party. You know, they're playing instruments and they're dancing around, just like they were in the original film. It was nice to see that again. So there's a new character named the Hunter. He's a Skeksis, and he's total nightmare fuel. He's so scary when he's jumping through the trees. I had no idea that Skeksis could be fast. Nightmare fuel for a new generation. The end of the episode ends with a really good battle scene between the Hunter and Rian and his father, Rian's father. And it ends in a surprisingly emotional and violent death scene of Rian's father. Although you don't see any blood, the thought of having all these tiny little creatures taking bites out of you is really disturbing. The battle scene was good, although there was a continuity error. The Hunter's mask is supposed to be damaged, but there's one shot where the Hunter's mask is not damaged. So it goes damaged, not damaged, and then damaged again. That could be some lazy editing. To have the continuity error in there it's a shame. And once you see it, you can't go back. So that's it for episode 4. Okay, so episode 5. Hup, the podling, gains some depth. He doubts himself. He's worried that he cannot protect Deet in the future. But Deet helps him realize that, in fact, he already defended her many times. There's some nice character relationship building going on there. Then there's a scene where Rian and Chamberlain are in Chamberlain's carriage. Chamberlain explains to Rian that the Skeksis don't believe that they're evil, which I thought was really interesting. That adds so much depth to the whole species of the Skeksis. Chamberlain is so intelligent and manipulative. He's one of the best characters of the series. I noticed that the Queen frowned a little when she was hugging her daughter. I think it was Celadon. Good job. I still hate the Queen. The Queen is my least favorite character. And then Agra has a really emotional scene with a cute small creature. This was really great character building for Agra. The scene showed that she was really caring and motherly, like, you know, as she ought to be, because she is this fantasy world's Mother Earth, like an embodiment of Mother Earth. So yeah, so far, Agra has been my favorite character. Chamberlain's cart scene where Rian is escaping was very intense. I loved it. It was very fun to watch, and it was a great action scene. Now let's talk about the dream space. I thought it was really cool that Agra had the power to unite all the dream fasting gelflings. I also really enjoyed when Agra was shaking her titties and spanking her own ass. Here's my question though about the dream space. Was it a good mechanic, or was it lazy writing? Because the dream space allowed the characters to meet without having to explain their backstory. It was really convenient, maybe a little too convenient. And then the Queen died, and we saw her pink blood. I thought that the Queen was really dumb for confronting the Skeksis without any backup. By the end of the episode, we learned that Celadon has been brainwashed, and she's going to follow the Skeksis. That's the end of episode 5. Episode 6. So I thought it was really cool that Rian and his friends used the pillbug creatures as unicycle motorcycles. I thought that was really neat and imaginative. There was a funny joke from Agra about how mystics are not known for being fast. It made me laugh. This episode we see the return of the Gelfling flute. Nostalgic moment. This episode is when I really noticed the musical score, especially during the Queen's funeral scene. I thought the music was really moving. But we see Skeksis pee for the very first time. The Skeksis apparently have 3 streams. I was actually really happy to see the Skeksis pee because seeing the Skeksis pee brought me more into the world of the Dark Crystal. That is partly what I liked about the movie, is that it sparked some imagination. A lot of the Dark Crystal was never explained, so it makes you imagine and wonder what's this character doing? What's that creature's purpose? And then finally we see a dark-skinned Gelfling. So I guess that's the racial minority. Then a trial by air was hinted at, but it was a shame that we didn't get to see it. It sounded like it would have been some sort of race of sorts. I think the trial by air was a missed opportunity to give a female character a really great action scene. And by the end of the episode, Celadon becomes pure evil. Her costume made her seem more threatening. And that's the end of episode 6. That flies. Episode 7. So I thought this was a really funny scene when Hup gets off of the giant flying stingray. He says, "Hup want die," and then he barfs. I thought that was really funny. And then in this episode we saw the creature contest winner for 2 seconds. The creature contest was something that the Jim Henson Company was doing for this series, the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance. So the contest was you had to submit drawings of your creature to the contest, and then the winner got their creature featured in the series, and the winner also had their name as a part of the credits. And this was really annoying to me because I submitted my creatures. I submitted this one, which is a hand puppet. You put your hand here in the back, and then you can move its head around. You know, the middle finger is the head, and then your other fingers, your thumb, will control the legs of the creature. And then I also submitted this one, who he has a hole at the bottom, so when you push a stick up through the hole, he can like go up and down. Considering how many creatures were actually in the show, and the time we actually got to spend with those creatures, I feel like there could have been more than just one winner for the creature contest. I really wanted to win. Anyway, back to talking about the series. I loved the heretic Skeksis and his mystic counterpart. They were so fun to watch. So this episode we find out that the spiders, the Arathians I think they're called, are actually a sentient hive mind. This was a nice homage to Labyrinth, the film Labyrinth. In the film Labyrinth, they have a scene where there's like a vertical tunnel full of these decrepit green hands, and they all form faces with the hands, which is exactly what these spider creatures were doing. So I was annoyed by, I got really annoyed by the heretic and his and the mystic counterpart when they weren't getting to the explanation of Thra or what the hell was going on. Rather, we get to see an original opera. I felt sympathy for the characters because they also were annoyed in the series, so it was really fun to sympathize with the fictional character. The hunter returns, and we get to see puppet carnage. The hunter grabs a gelfling and throws him off the cliff. I think you hear a splat too. I think there's a puppet splat, but it's great. You see the puppet fly across screen. It's awesome. Then we cut back to the heretic, and we get to see a really cute mini puppet show that explains the history of Thra and the Skeks. So we find out that the Skeksis and the Mystics used to be one being. Each Skeksis has a mystic counterpart. And we find out that the Skeks, when they came to Thra, they cracked the crystal, and that caused this event to happen where the evil part of their bodies split from their good part of the bodies. Basically, we find out that the Skeksis and the Mystics must become whole again. One thing that I didn't like was when they introduced the mini puppet show, the Mystic says something like the ancient art of puppetry, and it was kind of like he semi-broke the fourth wall, because he's talking about puppetry when he is a puppet, and that kind of took me out of the show. It was like an inside joke, almost. It's like a really weird inside joke. Then the hunter kidnaps Bria in a dynamic scene. I love that the archer was there in that scene, and he was being useful. He was being helpful, as opposed to the other mystics who are nowhere to be found. And the episode ends with these disgusting mini spiders who create zombie gelflings by attaching themselves onto the side of the gelfling's face. I thought this was a really great element to add to the world. This was a great way to end the episode as well. Episode 8. Okay, the Skeksis are so evil. Celadon. I felt so sorry for Celadon in this episode. I couldn't believe how violent the Skeksis were. They were ripping her clothes off. I thought the Skeksis were when they were ripping Celadon's clothes off, and I thought they were eating her or killing her, or more than just ripping off her clothes. It was a lot. It was a lot to watch. And then they pulled her away by her hair, which was so barbaric. We're going to talk more about this scene in the behind the scenes portion. So even after that, Celadon is still delusional, and she thinks that her sister Bria is to blame for everything. Okay, did Bria rip off your clothes and pull you by the hair? I don't like Celadon. Here's a question that you might want to think about. How can Aughra hear with her eye? Magic, perhaps? Maybe in this alien world, people can hear with their eyes? Who knows? Who cares? So, the spiders and the Gelfling form an alliance, which was totally unexpected. Looking at the spiders, you think, wow, they must be evil. Turns out the only villains in the series are the Skeksis. Everything on Thra belongs on Thra. Okay, so here's something that I almost missed completely. Deet actually has 2 fathers. I liked that they did not dwell on this. It was just... This is something that was just normal in this alien world. And it was never explained. And why would it matter on an alien world? It's not Earth, so it doesn't matter. The end of the episode ends with Deet gaining the power of the Sentry Tree in order to absorb the darkening. So now Deet has the power to absorb the darkening. But in this scene, while she's absorbing the Sentry Tree's powers, we get a glimpse of the future. And we see Kira's mom running away from Gartham. And then we also see Jen healing the Dark Crystal. We actually get to see a glimpse into the future, which is the original film, The Dark Crystal. Deet is also seen on a throne with purple eyes. What does that mean? Does this mean we're getting a sequel? Because the whole vision was all taking place in the future. So Deet with purple eyes, that's something that's going to happen in the future? Like, is the sequel happening? That's it for episode 8. Episode 9. Agra was so noble for offering herself as a sacrificial trade to save Bria and company from essence suckage. She's one of the best protagonists of this series. Then there's a scene where Chamberlain saves the general. So the general, Skeksis, is about to be killed by Tavra. And then Chamberlain comes up out of nowhere and stabs Tavra right through with this giant sword. It was so unexpected and gruesome. I loved it. Again, making Chamberlain out to be this totally evil character. Probably more evil than any of the other Skeksis. And then Agra died? What? How is that possible? Well, if you've seen the film, you know she's going to come back. So, how does she come back? Agra's scene where she gets sucked was so intense. This scene also showed how strong Agra is, physically and mentally. Here's another question I have. What is the point in female gelflings riding landstriders when females can fly? Something to think about. This question is so important because you have to ask yourself, does this mean that there was some lazy world building? Was this lazy world building? When you think of the film, Kira was only able to glide in the movie. But in the series, all the females are able to actually fly. It could be argued that Kira was teaching Jen how to ride a landstrider. That's a good argument. But the series, it doesn't make any sense for the females to be riding landstrider. So when Tavra dies, Celadon is finally redeemed and forgiven. It was an emotional scene. I bought it. I was into it. What was nice was that previous to Tavra's death, she told her sisters that she had actually fused minds with the mini spider that was on her face. So when Tavra's physical body died, the tiny bug crept off her face and left. So Tavra is actually still alive. Her mind is just fused with that tiny little bug. The Arathians, or the spider people, are the Gartham. I knew it. If you've seen the movie, you probably knew it as well. The Gartham are like a scientific mutant from what this episode has shown us. Okay, the dual glaive has the power to communicate through all fire and the crystal, adding to the theme of being one. How does this dual glaive, how does it have the power to do that? I want to know in the next episode. Okay, so this is the last episode of the series, episode 10. The episode starts out with Deet and Rian hinting at a potential romance, which I thought was like, come on, it's episode 10, like, now you're gonna start that? If you're gonna do like a potential romance, if you're gonna try to hint at a romance, you should have been doing it in episode 1 or 2. If you had done that in episode 1 or 2, those episodes wouldn't have been so boring. There was this amazing explanation from the Emperor Skeksis, that he fears death because when the Skeksis were created, They were created from like a really painful split. So it was like a physical nightmare for them. So they started life painfully. They live in fear of the pain that they might feel when they die. It made me think that the Skeksis are such tragic beings, constantly living in fear and sadness. Then we see the Skeksis cladded in armor, which was terrifying. And then we see Rian wielding the dual glaive in an action scene against the General Skeksis. In this scene, I wish that the Gelflings had a bigger army going up against the Skeksis. In the series, the Skeksis, in fact, mention this, and they make fun of the Gelflings for having so few warriors. This could have easily been fixed with CGI. You could have CGI'd a bunch of Gelflings in there fighting the Skeksis. It could have been this huge army. But because puppets were used, there was a limited number of characters that were available for the filmmakers to use during this battle sequence. Then we see Skektek, the scientist, brutally beat the mute slaves, which was so horrible and so sad to watch. It was so cruel. The filmmakers really made an effort to make the Skeksis out to be these wicked, terrible creatures. And they did a really good job in doing that. Then we see the mystic archer commit suicide in order to save the Gelflings from the hunter. It was really noble of him, but it made me think of the other mystics and where they were. I thought that the other mystics, because the other mystics were not helping out at all, I felt as though they were being really selfish. And out of the hunter's body is Aughra, who was absorbed into the hunter's body. Aughra is Thrall's version of Jesus. And then the Gelfling reinforcements show up, plus the Arathians, but the battle's already over, so there was really no point in them even showing up. And then the Emperor tries to use the Darkening as a last-ditch effort to win the battle. Deet uses her newfound powers to absorb the Darkening and then reflect the Darkening back to the Skeksis, which ends up exploding Skeklak, the Boyle Skeksis' head. The whole series I've been waiting for that Skeksis to die, and I'm really glad that she did. And then we find out that the piece of the crystal was actually in the dual glaive the whole time, which makes total sense because the dual glaive had the power to speak through the crystal and speak through every fire that was lit on the planet. This also explains how Aughra was able to attain the crystal shard in the film. And then we find out that the Gartham are actually hybrids of those mute slave creatures and the Arathians. We're left with this one question: what happened to Deet? Where did she go? Where is she going to? And that's it for episode 10. So in conclusion, if there is a second season, I really hope that doesn't take another 4 or 3 years to create, because I don't want to wait that long. I felt like we could have spent less time with so many other characters. Like, there were so many characters in the series that it was just too much, and less is more. I feel like too much time was spent on puppets and locales, and the main characters were almost lost in the mix. The main characters had almost zero relationship between each other. That could have been an easy fix if they had have just spent more time together. The characters could have also built upon each other, just like the scene in previous episode where Deet and Hup were building upon each other. Now Hup was literally thrown to the side which was really not cool because he never fulfilled his paladin quest. The whole time this whole series he's been wanting to be a paladin, and then he never got to finish he never got to attain his goal. So the series could end here. However, the filmmakers have the puppets and the sets to create more story to progress the events of Age of Resistance. Alternatively, they could make a sequel to the original film. So now I'd like to talk about The Crystal Calls, the behind-the-scenes documentary that the filmmakers made in addition to the series. So in this, the filmmakers explained that they wanted CGI gelflings and puppet Skeksis, which makes no sense. Why would you have a CGI character interacting with a real character? It's stupid. So the studio that did all the CGI, they took an original scene from the movie and they augmented Kira's face with CGI, and it looked amazing. It looked so good. And from what I could tell, they did not do this in this series at all, or they barely did it. Just thinking back about all the characters that I didn't really like the Queen or Rian's girlfriend really could have benefited from some CGI expression. So then the filmmakers explained that there were a lot of random ideas being thrown around, like, oh, let's have a scene where podlings get washed, and let's have this scene, let's have that scene, which is a clear indication that there was a lack of focus. The writer just included it all. That explains why the focus was lost on the main characters. And then there was a whole segment about feminism. The filmmakers got really annoying when they tried to say that feminism was a part of the world of the Dark Crystal, which is an alien world. It's a fantasy world. Me personally, when I'm watching a fantasy film or a science fiction film, I'd prefer not to be reminded of the reality of our world. That's why it is a fantasy. If the filmmakers were so concerned about feminism, then why did they not give Deet or Bria major action scenes? Rian, the male character, pretty much had them all. The best action scenes were with Rian. Even the last battle revolved all around him. So, it's confusing. So the trial by air could have been an action scene for a female character, but that was totally blown over. We never got to see that ever happen. The scene where Celadon gets all her clothes ripped off, that was definitely not female empowerment. If anything, that was like female oppression. Technically, it's not female oppression at all, because the Skeksis are unisex. If you know and read about Skeksis, they are meant to be a unisex species, some having male tendencies and some having more female tendencies. And then another scene, we see Tavra gets stabbed by Chamberlain. Like, where's the female empowerment? Where is the female empowerment? So far, we are learning that the filmmakers are very confused about their politics. I wouldn't be talking about this if I hadn't have watched the behind the scenes. I personally don't think that there is any lesson to be learned from the Dark Crystal. The Dark Crystal isn't really something that can be used to push a political agenda. It's too alien. What it is it's pure entertainment and wonder. There's nothing earthly about it, so your brain doesn't connect reality to this world in the slightest. This world is its own world. There's also some more evidence of the filmmakers' confusion surrounding politics. When you think about colonialism, the Skeksis are foreign to this land. The Gelflings are being oppressed by the Skeksis. But at the same time, the Podlings are being oppressed by the Gelflings. Remember the scene where the Gelflings had to wash the Podlings as if the Gelflings were better or cleanlier then the podlings. This was really annoying and confusing. If you apply a political agenda to the Dark Crystal, it makes no sense and it doesn't belong. So overall, it was a really enjoyable experience for old and new fans of the Dark Crystal. I hope everyone takes the time to watch this series and become invested in this fantasy world.